Okay, I'm just going to do a sound check on this for a moment to make sure that people can hear. I've got Joseph sat over to the side of me because he's my tech whiz, and he's going to also bring through any questions that come up on Facebook. If there are any, hopefully there will be. I'm just going to do a sound check on this for a moment to make sure that people can hear. Okay, it's a feedback on there, isn't it? So I'm going to need to kick off the Facebook one. Could you just X me out of that one? Thank you. There we go. Okay, try that again. If there's anybody, hopefully, watching this, listening to this, can you just give me a thumbs up? Let me know that you can hear everything okay. Is everything all right? Is everything coming through okay? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to give it a few moments, as is customary for anybody who does this, to allow people to join. I'm 10 minutes late. I'm sorry about that. That was something to do with my inability and my son's expert ability to be able to compile photographs and videos in a format that allows people to see them, and also to be able to figure out the live using a different webcam. So hello and good evening, and thank you for joining me. As I say, I'm not going to kick off just yet. I'll let the numbers build up. Joe, if you can let me know what we're looking at in terms of numbers on there, but okay, so I'm going to want that to go up a little bit first before we start. Thank you. I'm not going to make you sit there whilst I do nothing, or even worse, whilst I prattle on. So I'll just give it a couple of minutes, as I say, and then I'll start off. So the reason for the live, or the what's going to be discussed here, as I was mentioned before, there's a few things really. There's aspects of evidence, primary or principal piece of evidence that's been relied upon, not just by the English government, but by the Scottish government, by the Welsh government, by jurisdictions throughout the world, as being a heavily weighted piece of evidence against the electronic training collar, certainly when used in comparison with alternatives, namely reward-based training or positive reward-based training. We're going to discuss that and what that actually means, how people interpret that, and whether the two are indeed mutually incompatible, or whether they work together to produce a unified and harmonious result for the animal, for the owner, and for the community within which both live. So throughout, you might see me looking down. I've got my phone down here where I've actually screenshot certain documents and pieces of information that I want to put over to you. So please forgive me if you do see my eyes moving away, and if phones ping like that as well. It is live, so I can't account for what might pop up on my telephone there. But telephone, how old is that? On my mobile. But yeah, so as we go through, I'm going to present some pieces of information there for you. Can you just mute that for me, please? Thank you. I'm going to present some pieces of information for you, discuss some bits and bobs. Everybody knows my particular stance with regards to electronic training collars, but I'll just repeat that anyway. And the position of the Association of Responsible Dog Owners and the hundreds and hundreds of people who support that ethos. And we'll take it forward from there, and I'll take questions as they come up on Facebook. I did invite people to join. There are a couple of people that asked and said that they would join. I have sent one of them. I take my hat off to you, because one of them is a volunteer at a couple of national charities, but one in particular who is a positive reinforcer. I'm not going to say pure. The person hasn't said pure. They're a positive reinforcement trainer, probably a trainer who eschews aversive interventions, or prefers not to use any sort of like corrective measures for those of us who tend to speak normally. And I've sent a link across. I don't know whether or not it hasn't come up yet, asking to join. So we'll see how we go. Unfortunately, there were people who sent emails through saying, look, I'd like to watch it, but I don't really want to get involved in it. That's absolutely fine. I understand. And I would say that if there are any people watching this who are critical of electronic training collars, or who hold a particular position that is against them, where the two don't gel together, that I would ask that you feel free to ask questions. Be respectful, be polite, and I promise you that you will receive respect and politeness in return. But yeah, if there's anything that you want to ask of me, or if I can put it out to a wider audience and ask other people, then please do so, and let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can put forward. So whereabouts are we at the moment, Joe, in terms of 45? Okay, we've got 45. When I hit 50, we'll start. I feel like an auctioneer, but so we'll wait until we hit 50. So this is going to be the first time that I use Zoom, but I use Zoom basically to communicate, correspond with people and advise people, look at videos, etc. On a professional level, but I don't generally tend to use it in a presentation manner. So screen sharing, which is something that I'm going to use for the first time really on this live here, it's a first for me. So again, I've got my man in the corner who can help me out if things go wrong, but I'm just going to do my best. But if you hear us having a little bit of a chat whilst I'm going through it, then please forgive me. As I say, it's not polished. I'm not a senior lecturer or anything like that. I'm just somebody who's trying to present something to you and trying to give you the information as best I can. Where are we at? 46, creeping up, isn't it? Creeping up. Right, okay. Somebody's popping up on Instagram there, Joe, saying not showing up, so I don't know what it is that you are doing on that. Okay, I'm gonna kick off. We're a little bit under 50, but hopefully we'll get some more in there anyway. So, as many people will know, in England in 2018, the Secretary of State, then Secretary of State, Michael Gove, made an announcement that he intended to ban electronic training collars for cats and dogs. Such was the extent of the rigorous research that the Secretary of State undertook, that he failed to realise that there are no handheld electronic training collars for cats. However, there are containment systems, and those containment systems have been left well alone for cats and for dogs, as have anti-bark collars. So the way that we sit at the moment is that the English government is looking to, or standing by at the moment, their proposal to prohibit, to ban the use of handheld electronic training collars in England for the training of dogs only. Okay, so not anti-bark collars and not containment systems. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that Scotland have not banned electronic training collars. Lots of people always say, are they banned in Scotland? Scotland have banned them. No, Scotland haven't. Scotland have issued guidance, and Scotland are basically going to revisit the topic. They've been given until 2025 to do that. So at the moment, electronic training collars are perfectly legal in Scotland and in England. The only place where they have been prohibited is Wales. Okay, and interestingly, as we go along, we'll probably come back to this, but since that banning of electronic training collars in Wales in 2010, there have been an increase, well, there's been an increase everywhere, but there's been a significant increase in livestock attacks by dogs in Wales. And perhaps more interestingly than that, in a National Police Chief Council Fire Force report, which I've referenced several times because it is one of the only reliable, if you like, well, based on the statistics that have been given, which are less than would actually take place in reality. However, with the statistics that they've got, it's one of the only reliable pieces of unbiased or impartial information available. And if you look at the amount of dogs shot for worrying livestock, Wales is 33%, North Wales 33% higher than the other English force areas, the 4 other English force areas in that report combined. Okay, so you remove the ability to use, I'm not saying that it's an absolute correlation is the absolute reason for that, but I am saying that it is incredibly interesting and it's problematic, and it's something that needs looking at, where you remove something that is scientifically validated to be able to achieve a training aim, and is empirically, so shown by thousands of people to be able to choose that aim, and you remove it, but the problem still remains. And it would appear that the resolution in North Wales over the past 10 years has been to shoot more dogs. Now, I know that there'll be lots of farmers watching who will think, well, good, the dogs deserve it. And do you know what? If it was one of my dogs that was attacking your livestock and you shot my dog, it wouldn't be you who I held accountable. It would be me for recognizing or failing to recognize the fact that I had a dog that was capable of doing that, because they're opportunistic predators, and because I'd failed to do anything about it. For the people of Wales, which our government in England are looking to do here, and Scotland perhaps will look to do there, that rug was pulled from them. That ability to be able to proactively prevent their dog from attacking that animal was taken from them when the government decided in their infinite wisdom to ban the most scientifically researched and proven means of stopping the dog from choosing to do that in the first place from a training perspective. So, a piece of research that everybody knows about. Everybody talks about the DEFRA study, the Lincoln study, the DEFRA-funded AW1402A, a study that was conducted or commissioned by DEFRA, the English government advisors equivalents exist across various jurisdictions, to look at the impact of electronic training aids on the welfare of dogs, and that then became the efficacy of the tools as well. So how good are they at training dogs? Are they any better, or are they worse than training dogs without them and training dogs with rewards only? And so the study was done at a cost of just over £500,000, and back came the conclusions, and the conclusions sort of altered as it went along during, over the period of time. So what came back in 2012-13 wasn't quite the same as what came back in 2014 when the study was published in the journal PLOS One. So this study then went forward as being, because essentially prior to this it was accepted, look, there's been no field studies, there's been no, everything has been sort of like, in a scientific environment, but we haven't actually looked at anything in the way that these products would actually be used. So that was what this study intended to do, and it failed miserably in achieving that aim, and I'm going to go through that and show you exactly why. A lot of the things that the study did or failed to do weren't presented, weren't disclosed to the general public. I'll let you see, you can make your own decisions on things. And inferences or conclusions were drawn as a result of that study that basically grossly exaggerated the claims, or grossly exaggerated the evidence upon which the claims were made. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to have a look at that study, which in 2018, from my own Member of Parliament, who's the Right Honourable Geoffrey Cox, who, the former Attorney General, in 2018, who sent back to me in February a letter from the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, saying that their intention was not to ban electronic training collars because their own research proved inconclusive. It was insufficient evidence to support a ban. A couple of weeks later, all of a sudden, we need to ban these punitive devices, after somebody went and had a word in the Secretary of State's ear, Michael Gove, and decided that it would be a good idea and a vote winner to actually go ahead and ban these punitive devices, about which people know very little. So it's an easy one, isn't it? Let's tell everybody that people electrocute dogs. Let's sensationalize it. Let's hit the emotive button. Let's generate our visceral response and tell people 6,000 volts of electricity to a dog's neck. Would you electrocute man's best friend so that he sat, etc., etc. The public were enraged. Allegedly, the narrative went out and away it went. Boom, this is what we're going to do. And a consultation was run where 64% of the responses came back and said, we don't want you to. So the public support that had been promised wasn't actually there when the consultation was run. The responses didn't match the narrative, which is quite embarrassing and quite problematic when you've been told one thing, but the actual results tell something else. So there's been this delay from 2018, we're now through to 2022. Fantastic from an animal welfare point of view, because plenty of dogs have been able to be given their freedoms, plenty of dogs have had their safety secured for longer. Dogs that would have otherwise faced a needle haven't, so I would hope that if there's any members of the veterinary profession listening to this, as you actually begin to see the evidence presented and hear what's presented before you, that you may step back, if you are of a following the narrative mindset, and actually listen from a more objective, pragmatic, science-based, and certainly animal welfare focused position. Because I know the people that I interact with and I work with, and colleagues and members of the Association of Responsible Dog Owners, and certainly members of large charities as well, who won't say so in public, but will say so behind closed doors. Electronic training aids, when used responsibly and when you're using quality equipment, have a very valid seat at the table of animal welfare, promoting animal welfare. And one thing that I'd really like to just add on a personal level here, when we're discussing animal welfare, it doesn't stop at the end of our lead. Animal welfare isn't canine centric. The world doesn't revolve around our dogs. Our dogs interact with other animals within society. They interact with people within communities, and we need to be responsible and respectful, and to recognize that. It is our duty as the sort of owners of those dogs. And I know we're not allowed to say owners now, we need to be companions, or we need to be guardians, etc. We own the dogs. If your dog commits a criminal offense or puts you in breach of dog legislation and you're standing before a magistrate or a judge, believe you me, saying I'm their guardian and they didn't consent to the behavior that you're talking about isn't going to get you very far. You own the dog, you're responsible for what the dog does, and you ought to act responsibly in ensuring that certain behaviors do or do not occur. So let's bring in the Lincoln research, the Lincoln study research in just a second. Joe, are there any questions that have come up yet?
Yeah, so there's Bruce Peterson asked still nothing about the 50,000 challenge. Okay, so
Bruce, the 50,000 challenge. Look, I'm going to make a note of that because I'm going to talk about that later on, because I think I covered that before in a different live. The 50,000 challenge. It sort of dovetails in with what we're talking about here, really. But I just want to say to people that's closed. That challenge is closed. That challenge ran for about 2 months. It was open for 2 months. I think there's people popping up here and there saying I can do it or I would do it. Look, it's closed. You had your opportunity. The stage was set. Everybody was open. It didn't happen. We're done. We're moving on from that. But I will come back and talk about that as we go forward. Is there anything else there, Joe?
Ginny asked, is it possible to finance and do a study that is fair? If it were, what would it take? I'd happily chip in £300 if it were, and I'm sure many others would too.
Ginny, the thing about conducting studies and impartiality, first of all, as soon as if I had the money to be able to fund a study, then that study would, if I were the external observer, I would consider that study to be biased because it's been funded by somebody who's got an interest in a particular outcome. No matter how objective I wanted to be, I could not argue against that person who is saying there is a potential for bias. I wouldn't be the person running the study, but if I'm the person paying the piper, then I can expect the tune to go according to my, preferences. And that's a problem. I think that's a problem in a lot of research. And I'm not the only person that would say that. I've spoken to people who are very high up academically and have been for a very long time who also recognize that problem. And it's a problem that's been publicized in many places. And it's not all science. It's bad to say that all science is bad. It isn't. There's some very good science. There's some incredible scientists. I'm not a scientist, in terms of working within academia or anything like that. I like to read scientific papers. I like to read things that I think are going to question what I believe, because I think that's, from my understanding of science, is that's what science should do. It should question more than it answers, and push boundaries and, look to push forward. So what you find with the electronic training collar literature, and certainly the scientific literature, is much of it is basically throwing the same ingredient into the same pot to produce the same result. It doesn't challenge itself. It looks to actually confirm what has already been said, because it's quite easy to do that, isn't it? Who wants to stand out like a proud nail when it's far easier to just sit flush with everybody else and make your way through? And there are lots of people who I have worked with and do work with who are in precarious positions professionally, were they to speak out. They agree. They agree with the use of electronic training collars under certain circumstances and providing certain provisions are met. But they, unfortunately for them, it would essentially be career suicide to speak out about it. And it'd be very easy to say, well, you should speak about it because you're part of the problem, et cetera, et cetera. But life is life, isn't it? People have to live and they have to pursue their own careers. And there's plenty of things that we might agree with or disagree with that we don't necessarily stand out and speak publicly about. So, yeah, I mean, on the funding of a study, Ginny, it's something has been discussed and still is being discussed, but it is about getting something that is impartial. And to be completely honest with you, the wealth of scientific evidence that already exists to confirm the efficacy of electronic training aids, certainly when used for preventing behaviors, predatory behaviors, enhancing off-lead reliability, etc., under intense distraction, particularly of other animals, competing motivators that are live, and unpredictable because we can't control the environment. There is a massive body of evidence, which is lots of it is put on the ARDO website, and there is additional stuff there as well that is available. I can put links on the Facebook page at the end of this if you like, for people to be able to see that. But it's almost like so ideological that it is basically saying that sky isn't blue, it's green, you know, and refusing to actually accept the evidence that's being presented. So anyway, Joe, is there anything else before I come on to this?
Karen asked, is it possible to start a court process to challenge the motion as a group / public interest, etc.?
It depends what you are. So there's already been, in terms of the actual way that the consultation itself was conducted and the grounds, etc., surrounding the consultation, as everybody knows, was thankfully was challenged by the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association, which is a trade body for electronic training collars, who themselves actually aren't pushing for a blanket sort of like market, but are quite very, very responsibly pushing for exactly the same thing as the Association of Responsible Dog Owners is pushing for, and lots of people who wrote into the government were pushing for, which is a regulated approach, a sensible regulated approach. You know, people using, get rid of the rubbish, use stuff that works, and use it once you've been taught how to use it, you know, under supervision, under guidance, so that you know what you're doing. And it wasn't successful. And there was an appeal which wasn't successful. So it depends what you're asking or what you're challenging. There is something that potentially could be challenged on a discrimination level, and that's something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And there are no doubt nuances that, you know, with the right legal team, you probably could look at, yes, but don't underestimate the cost of legal proceedings. You know, you're looking at extensive amounts of money to run these things through, and they take time as well. It's important to remember that they take time. So yeah, while it's something that I'd wholeheartedly think, yeah, do it, let's do absolutely everything. You know, it's got to be realistic, and we've got to look at what is it that we're actually looking to challenge. And there's something that, as I say, that I'll come on to. Okay, I'm going to just push a little button here, which is the first time that I've done it. Okay, my link that went out to somebody to join me still hasn't happened. Please just allow me to have a quick wet. Okay. So the Lincoln study was conducted around about 10 years ago, and it was, for those people who don't know, those people who already do know, excuse me for repeating, but I'm going to try and summarize as best I can. So the idea was to have a look at electronic training collars being used in the field, as they would be used in comparison to electronic training, or those trainers that would use it. There were two. Those trainers that would use electronic collars, training dogs with them, training dogs without them, and then another group of trainers who are reward-based, anti-electronic training collar, who came from the Association of Pet Dog Trainers, who I used to be a member of. So this training took place, and for a start, again, I don't want to go over old ground, but trainers were given 15 minutes a day for 5 days to train the dogs. That is very, very pressurized anyway for anybody who starts off training with an electronic training collar. I'm sure you would agree, for the people who are experienced in training, whether you're a trainer or whether you are somebody who has been taught how to train with an electronic training collar, you would not expect to see anything like a result for 15 minutes a day, 5 days, you know, over a 5-day period. It's absolutely ridiculous, to be honest with you, but there you go. That's what was given. And so the training took place 2 different locations. And again, this is something that I'm going to bring up. The trainers who worked with electronic training collars, they worked in Scotland, and the trainers who worked with rewards worked in Lincoln. The training that took place in Scotland took place in winter, and the training that took place in Lincoln took place in spring. So you've already got differences of locations and clear temperatures. You would think there would be clear temperature differences there as well. And what basically happened then was a 3-month period elapsed, and then the dogs were taken back to training centres, and they were tested to see, you know, what their responses were. Did they associate the training centre with aversive associations, or were they positive? And there were different measures that they did to use this, which were ethograms, essentially observing the behaviour of the dogs and marking, you know, looking for certain behaviours associated with negative or positive welfare states, and cortisol levels to determine, you know, from a hormonal level, whether or not the dogs were overly aroused or not. And then conclusions were drawn. Now, there's something that I just want to talk about with this, what was absolutely imperative to this study, and the reason why it was imperative to this study is because prior to this study being conducted, one of the lead researchers on it had actually written to DEFRA calling for a ban on electronic training products. Two other researchers on the project had signed a petition to ban electronic training collars. Okay, I believe it might be on the ARDO site. If not, those papers can be shown. They exist. It's not made up. So you have a potential for bias. You know, if you have, everybody's got a bias to one degree or another. Everybody's got an opinion on something when they're given evidence of it or when they have experience of it. Everybody forms some sort of opinion. But if you have a bias against something that you're supposed to be objectively analyzing, then that becomes problematic, and it's liable to interfere, whether it does it consciously or subconsciously. Your bias is liable to interfere and potentially influence your decision-making process, your conclusions that you make. So in order to eliminate the bias, all of the dogs wore electronic training collars. So the process was video recorded. The training of the dogs was video recorded. All of the dogs wore electronic training collars, whether they were deactivated for the ones that weren't actually being trained with them, or were switched on and activated for the trainers that were training with them. But the idea here was so that anybody who then goes and views the tapes cannot be influenced by their own pre-existing bias over which they, you know, perhaps have no conscious control. They can't be influenced by it because they're essentially looking at the dogs wearing the same thing. There were problems with that didn't pop up in the actual study itself, and the problems were that only the trainers that were working with the dogs with the electronic training collars had transmitters, and those transmitters were clearly visible, and the trainer reaching to push the button on that transmitter was clearly visible. Now, I'll just give you just a few seconds to actually think about that. So you're looking at something, and the point that you're trying to make is, does the use of the electronic training collar affect the behavior, the welfare state of this animal compared to these animals? And I'm looking purely at the behavior of the animals. I'm not looking at the behavior of the individual. I'm looking at the behavior of the animals. I don't particularly like electronic training collars, and I can see that these two people over here have got transmitters hanging around their neck, and I can also see when they go and push the button on those transmitters. Now, anybody who has a pre-existing, no matter how much I try, is going to be drawn into the fact that I can see that. Apart from the fact that the two people that were training with the electronic training collars were male and the others were female. So again, it was pretty obvious. And the fact that the people that were training with the electronic training collars were doing so in Scotland, and the others were doing so in Lincoln. So it was pretty obvious which group was which. So this blinding protocol that was supposed to sort of like guard against the creep of bias, or the potential creep of bias, was seriously flawed. It was obvious who was who. So let me just do a little screen share with you just before I do this. Joe, any questions there at all?
Yeah, so Danny Wells asked, we talk about bias and not running a study because of said bias. However, this Force Free movement is doing exactly that. Running bias study, employing bias academics to suit their own agenda, and they're getting away with it so far.
Agreed. And I think, Danny, you'd be the first one to, we've had enough discussions on this, even away from electronic training collars or dogs and training and animal welfare, to say that this is a problem, or it exists across the board, whatever it is that's trying to be proven. It's almost as though we used to have religion as being the unquestionable. And now we have science as being the unquestionable. But just because something's scientific doesn't mean that it's good science. There is good science, and something is very, very well researched and well presented scientifically. There's also bad science. And just because it goes under the title of science doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it good. So, and peer review as well. So if I get a couple of people to have a look at my paper, or one person to have a look at my paper and come back and say, yeah, it isn't without any, or it's without any obvious flaws, and there's a few things in there that we think is of value to the scientific community going forward. Peer review isn't a sort of like, a shield against external inquiry. It doesn't mean that something has integrity just because it's been peer reviewed. It just basically means, if you look at the beautiful Forbes article from a professor of astronomy, I believe, or astrology, or one of the two, who wrote in Forbes and basically said all it means is that it is without obvious flaws and that it is fit to go forward. for publication, at which point it should expect to be basically put under the microscope by public opinion and people's ability to dissect it and question it. That's the whole purpose of it. So say again, Joe, is there anything else on there?
Yeah, I'll just do a couple more. Alison said, I'm not aware of anyone being charged in relation for failing to microchip a dog, despite it being the law for some time. If the e-collar is banned in England, which body would enforce the ban? How is it being enforced in Wales currently?
Well, the question is how many people in Wales are being prosecuted for the use of an electronic training collar causing harm to their dog? The answer to that is none. There was one prosecution for a guy shortly after the Welsh ban came in, and that prosecution was for his dog wearing a containment collar. Wales banned containment systems as well. So I'll give you a story in a minute, but in Wales, containment systems are banned. Oh, look, Skinner. Skinner's smacking me around the back of the head. Good man. Wales banned containment systems, and the chap had a containment collar on his dog, and simply by virtue of the fact that his dog was wearing one, no harm being done, he was fined £3,000. Now, as a comparison, I think it was earlier on, or no, to the latter part of last year, I had a look. There was a guy in Scotland who I believe he killed his girlfriend's dog. And I think the fine was about £645 as a result of that. And there's another case that went on as well in England not so long ago, where somebody stabbed their partner's dog 14 times with a pair of nail scissors. And again, I don't believe the fine breached £1,000. There was a bit of community service going on there and a little bit of a curfew, because of course you only stab somebody's dog in the hours of darkness. Absolutely ridiculous, but just let that give you an idea in terms of the enforcement and how this became a sort of like flagship piece of legislation to almost sort of like declare, look how seriously we're taking this. We're going to heavily fine somebody who had a containment system on a containment collar on their dog, which England and Scotland see no issue with. There is no issue with containment systems, but the chap was just made an example of. In terms of enforcement, if I can, I'll come on to that a little bit later on. It's impossible. It's not impossible, certainly where you allow 2 out of 3 systems where the collar that the dog is wearing is identical to any lay person. Who's going to train all the enforcement people to be able to determine which one is a containment system, which one is a bark collar, which one is a handheld collar? How do you quantify or classify what is a handheld collar? If I have a geofencing system, which is controlled by my mobile phone for a dog, does that classify as a handheld electronic training collar? I'm able to adjust the stimulation of the collar, but it's a containment system. What about if I have a handheld collar, which is also doubles up, which exists, doubles up as an anti-bark collar, which is legal? I'm wearing this, I'm using this, my dog is wearing this. Which one is it? You know, am I legal? Am I, you know, breaching law? But it's so poorly thought out. The actual legislation or the proposed legislation itself is so poorly thought out. And again, I just want to come back to the fact of saying that it is not pro-animal welfare on any level whatsoever. It is not pro-animal welfare. We have existing legislation which has proved robust and reliable in dealing with matters of harm, causing harm, unnecessary suffering towards animals. It works. We don't need anything further. The thing that's further, the inclusion of electronic training collars in there is a political move, and it's a political move as a result of heavy lobbying by animal rights groups who are well funded and have a reason to push this forward. And don't think for a second that it's the only thing. But I don't want to go off on a tangent. I'm going to bring you in. I'm just going to share a screen here. Let me see. So if I'm going to share a screen, and I'm going to push this one here. Okay. AW14028, the Lincoln study, the DEFRA-funded Lincoln study. As you can see here, what you see is a dog. All the dogs were referred for similar problems, chase-related behaviours, recall behaviours, etc., as reported by the owners. And what you can see here is I believe you can see it here. Joe's just shot out the room, so I don't even know if it's mirroring properly onto the screen, but I hope it is. Bear with me a second. Joe, can you just check that that's coming up on the Facebook screen?
It's not.
Right, hang on a second then. That should screen mirror, shouldn't it? There, look. There you go. There you go. Can you see that one now? Sorry, people. Oh, look, there's a little bit of me up. Is that coming up on the Facebook page now? Okay. So what you can see here is one of the electronic training collar trainers. How do I know it's an electronic training collar trainer? Because he's carrying an electronic training collar transmitter. If you look down the front of the guy's chest, you can see the black transmitter hanging on a lanyard around his neck. As my mother would say, a blind man on a galloping horse couldn't miss that. What you can also see there is the dog alongside the trainer, the electronic training collar trainer, and you can also see that the dog is off lead. What you can also see behind the dog are two free-ranging sheep. See the little pen behind the guy? That's where those sheep were kept through part of the training process. But here, the dog is trusted to be amongst the sheep whilst the sheep are off, out of the pen and free roaming. Now, interestingly, I know I've said this before, Jonathan Cooper, Dr. Jonathan Cooper, who took part in this study, admitted on tape that only the dogs that were capable of receiving an electronic deterrent were permitted to be off lead amongst sheep that weren't penned. Now, bearing in mind that we're looking at a study here that is determining or comparing the efficacy, safety, reliability, the welfare impacts of dogs trained with electronic training collars and dogs trained without, you ought to ask you serious questions. You ought to be raise serious questions. You ought to be asking yourself serious questions. If only the dogs that have got live electronic training collars on are the dogs that are permitted to be off lead amongst free roaming sheep. Now, anybody, I just want to make this point, anybody who is responsible enough in that proximity to sheep anyway, no matter how well trained your dog is, unless you are actually putting it through a training process whereby you need to be certain that the dog will not approach that sheep and you can instantly do something about it if it makes the wrong decision, would have a lead on anyway. So this isn't an either or, it isn't a belt or braces. If I'm going to walk through a field, for a start, if I don't have to, I won't. If I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to send out a signal to people who are nearby to say, look, I'll pop the lead on my dog that isn't going to go near your livestock anyway. We walk them through closely to heel because my dog is well trained. And even if my lead were dropped, if the dog slipped the lead, which it wouldn't because it's been trained to avoid livestock, and dogs that have been trained to avoid an animal don't escape restraints in order to approach it, even if that did happen, the dog wouldn't choose to approach that animal. Okay, so just have a look at that. This is, as I say, the trainer who has the e-collar transmitter hanging down in front of them. The dog is there alongside them. The sheep are there in the background. Okay, let me see if I can just see how we move on to a different picture here. Joe, how do I switch it on to a next one? Okay, same thing again. Right, now, have a look at the front of this chap. Tell me if you are a person who is biased towards the use of electronic training collars, tell me for 1 second that you're not looking at the front of that guy and thinking, I know exactly what that is. It's a transmitter. Again, look at the dog. We've got chickens now in the background as well, free roaming chickens, another sheep there, free roaming sheep. You can see that the dog is paying no interest to the animals at all and is walking away with the handler. Now, just have a look at that. Have a look. That's even just with 15 minutes per day over a 5-day period training. This is what we've got. This is what you're seeing for a dog that has been referred for an issue that is chasing other animals. And it's a collie as well. Okay, so just have a look. Lead off, dog alongside, no attention being paid to the animals behind. Very, very obvious that the person with the dog is carrying a transmitter. Now let's have a look at this one again. We have another male. I've cut the head off, but believe you me, that is another male trainer. That is a dog that has been referred for chasing livestock, chasing after other animals, a dog that has got problems with recall. Look at the proximity of the dog to the sheep. Look how loose the lead is and look how close the dog is to the sheep. It is causing them no concern. Okay, this is a very, very, valid behavior. That this is the sit. So when you look at another study that came off the back of this in 2020 was by Lucy China et al. Et al. Is basically the same guys who were responsible, head the research on this, which were Professor Daniel Mills and Jonathan Cooper. And what was looked at in that study was the sit and the recall, and essentially the time it took from the dog to sit, etc., etc. What was omitted from that study was the proximity to the animals when the dog was performing those behaviors, and the ability of the dog to perform those behaviors reliably off lead in the presence of those animals. And as you can see here, this dog, which forms part of the e-collar group, is in very, very close proximity to the animal that it's been referred to chasing and attacking or representing a danger to, and it isn't doing that. Okay, so that's very nice. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to here is look how small that pen is that the sheep are in behind. This is another design flaw in this study. Dogs don't chase sheep that aren't moving. They don't run and attack sheep that are penned together in a little pen, or very few. From my own experience of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, it is when the animal moves that switches the dog on. That's the trigger, okay? That's the releasing the stimulus for the dog to switch into predation, is the movement. If I can go towards that animal and it's confined behind there, and I've moved towards it several times and I see that it's a confined animal, it isn't necessarily going to elicit that drive in me that I'm apparently being assessed for. So the sheep being penned in like that just doesn't reflect reality. Dogs don't go diving into tightly penned sheep and attack them. Dogs go in the real world and attack sheep that are running in open spaces. You know, that is what causes the dog to attack. As any person who has ever had a dog attack livestock or another animal, you know, any person who has ever owned the animal and seen the dog attack livestock or another animal, any vet who has ever been present, anybody who's actually, any trainer, anybody who's got an ounce of sense will tell you that the animals need to be moving in order to elicit the behavior in the dog. So what you're actually seeing here is a lukewarm representation of reality, not reality itself. Scotland with the e-collar train group. What do you notice, people? What do you notice compared to Lincoln in spring? Some of the behaviors that we might look at in a dog that are associated with negative welfare could be shivering, they could be whimpering, they could be paw lifting, they could be averted gaze, they could be various things, couldn't they? How many of you, if your dog was in those conditions there, would display signs associated with not being particularly happy about it? Because I know for a fact that there are hundreds of dogs that I have worked with that if you were to put them in that situation, they would give off behavioral indications that would say, I'm not at my best. This isn't my ideal environment. You know, so just look at the depth of the snow there. Even so, the dog's holding a nice sit and stay there at distance from the handler. This is the e-collar trainers that are in Scotland with the dogs here, because it was only the e-collar trainers that were in Scotland with the dogs. But there you go. There's the snow and the depth of it, that it isn't actually falling there. In a lot of the clips, you see the snow falling, and it's pretty blizzardous, to be completely honest with you. Again, we're back in Scotland still. This is earlier on. You can see they've moved location back into a farmyard here because of the depth of the snow, and tried to replicate it. Again, look at the size of that pen. You've got 3 sheep in there. Look how small that pen is. But still, you've got a dog there with herding heritage, and it's sat there and it's paying them no attention whatsoever. I've zoomed that in. The actual trainer who was with that dog was at distance from it. So you've got a dog that's at distance, sitting essentially with a trailing line. So there's no direct means of physical restraint on there. And the dog, as you can see, isn't giving interest towards the livestock behind it, despite being very close. But again, I refer back to the fact that this is a lukewarm representation of reality. The sheep aren't running. Look, they're laying there trying to keep warm because it's bloody freezing. And again, here we go again. Another one, dogs back in Scotland again, sitting, look at the proximity to the sheep. Again, we're at distance from the handler, as the handler in this clip was moving away from the dog and the dog's holding that sit stay. Very, very nice behavior, no interest in the livestock behind it, not something that's essentially been brought up in the conclusions of the study itself. Let's have a look at the next one. Same dog, same sheep, as you can see, again, holding that sit alongside the sheep, no interest whatsoever. Nice engagement with the handler or with the trainer. You can see that the dog's got focus there. No focus is on the sheep in this clip. But again, I want to come back to the fact that doesn't represent reality. The study itself is poor in design. That isn't when dogs chase livestock, when the livestock are put together like that. So yeah, you're going to get you set yourself up false conditions, you're going to get false conclusions. Again, as you can see, same thing, different dog, more sheep this time. So if you look at this, I mean, even the fact of the number of livestock, this is more likely to get a dog going, because the sheep are more likely to move together like that, and obviously there's more of them. But here as well, the dog is in a downstay, it's left, you know, the handler, the trainer is at distance from the dog, and the dog is paying no notice to the sheep. And you can see that the sheep in this image here differs from the sheep in, where are we? I need to go backwards. I don't know how to go backwards. I'll have a look again. But it differs in the sheep from the previous image, in that there are more of them. So how difficult is it to have the same number of sheep in the same pen, in the same sort of location, in order to get, you know, the same sort of response from the dog, or to be able to ensure that everything is as controlled as it can be? Very nice behavior. Again, focus on the handler. You can see laying down there on the cold surface. A lot of dogs wouldn't particularly like that. A lot of dogs would put in that hovering down or that hovering sit that anybody who's got any actual applied experience of owning or working with a dog would know damn well in those conditions. Let me just go back again. I just want to, I might need Joe here. Oh, there we go. Where are we? No. Hang on. Bear with me. I'll just need to bring that back up again. Joe, can you bring this back up for me? I've just knocked it down to the wrong one. I need the presentation brought back up, if you would do. No, that's not the one. On the slideshow. You just bring me up a slide. Bear with me just 1 second. If you've got any questions at the moment, please bring them up. Let's see if we bring this one here. And then how am I moving forward from that one now? I need to bring it up to the full size slideshow, that's it. And which one am I doing to knock it forward? See, it's making that doink noise. You got that? Okay, okay. Yeah, so there you go. We've got the dog in the down. Excuse me, I'm messing around a little bit on the buttons. Okay, now let me show you this one moving forward. This is a reward trained dog. For a start, look at the amount of toys that are on the ground, which is something that, again, is very different from what is given with the e-collar group. It's a lot heavier in reward on the reward train group than in comparison to the e-collar group. More than that, look at the ground. Where's the snow? You know, we've got this hound here, but where's the snow? And there's a few things that I want to bring out here. And the few things are that questions or statements that come through from the Department for the Environment of Food and Rural Affairs that have been replicated in Scotland, that have been replicated in jurisdictions around the world, are that the use of electronic training collars can cause or generate aggressive responding in dogs. Essentially, that you know, because the dog is experiencing a negative, the dog will become aggressive or can increasing aggressive behaviors. Now, I have to say, personally speaking, certainly when you're talking about using quality equipment and working with dogs for off-lead behaviors, so where the dog is at distance from you, recall-based behaviors, predatory control, that sort of thing, why would the dog become aggressive towards you? Ask yourself that question. Why would the dog become aggressive towards you? Something that I experienced that I've been taught to understand. I've been taught to understand how to predict and how to control that stimulation. That stimulation is then extended to distance from myself. And the dog experiences something that it is able to understand. It is able to know why it's happened, and it's able to know how to avoid it. And if it happens, it knows how to switch it off, how to escape the stimulation. Why would that dog then aggress towards the trainer, towards the owner? Frustration related aggression, where dogs have been expecting a reward and the non-delivery of that reward, which results in frustration, can result in over, let's say, I don't want to say aggression, but it can be something, certainly things that people would term as aggression. It would be a state of over arousal, heightened arousal, where it's a sort of like, I want it, where is it? I want it, where is it? And what you see here is a trainer who has switched this dog to working with toys, and then takes the toy from the dog. And in the clips that you saw earlier, which are stills, these are a couple of video clips. In the clips earlier where were stills, you could see that the dogs were basically there. They were holding a position. They were looking at the trainer, you know, offline or amongst the distraction of livestock, etc. And the dogs, by what you could see there, were pretty chilled out. But I'm just going to put, just before I hit this, are there any questions come through at all, Joe?
Yeah, there are. So Cheryl asked, are there any rescue centres that you know of who have considered balanced training to help some of the dogs who have serious issues and who have been in the centre for a long period of time who can't be rehomed?
Yes, there are. And I'm not going to name them because I'm not going to put them forward to the onslaught of media hate and trolls and the the people that have got courage behind a keyboard but lack the actual courage to stand before somebody and say it to their face. So yes, there are centres, and they're generally the centres that are on the bones of their arse, or that are there for the benefit of the dog more than the benefit of the bank balance and politics and popularity and things like that. So yes, there are some good rescue centres out there who genuinely have the needs of the dog and the ability to reach the dog and to help the dog overcome particular behavioural limitations that prohibit it from being rehomed, or certainly prevent it from coming back if it does get rehomed. National charities, RSPCA, Dogs Trust, Battersea, Blue Cross, those sorts of charities, no, they haven't. They won't. It's more important that they stick to their public image, their ideology, their preferred narrative, than it is that they actually stretch beyond that and reach inside and try and help the individual animal, where somebody, even when they're presented with evidence that they know, that they have seen and that they actually know can work, but they won't do it because they are reluctant. In fact, they absolutely refuse to go back on what they have been saying. It's almost like these charities, these organizations have become, they've created this monster that has controlled them, and it does control them, and they can't go back against it now. They've got to go with it. It's a tide that they have to move with. So if you turn around and say, do you know what, let's give it a go, and it works, where is your justification for the countless destructions of animals that you've done prior to that as a result of not being prepared to do that? It's too expensive in terms of public perception, political public perception. It's too expensive. Financial donations, a lot of them rely upon it. I understand it, but it's disgusting. It's wrong. And you're better off being poorer in wealth, but richer in integrity than you are the opposite way around. I really, really take my hat off to I take my hat off to the smaller charities who are just think, even if they think, do you know what, I don't know much about it. I've been to charities and presented to them and explained things to them and demonstrated things to them, and they've been receptive, very, very good and receptive. I've, as a lot of people will know, put an offer, similar offer that was seen about 65, 70,000 times to UK national charities, and they all rejected it. So yeah, that's the issue that you've got there. Joe, anything else before I tap this one?
One last one before. Damien Riley asked,
hi Damien,
was that collie with the live collar on the only dog that was off lead with sheep?
No, there's others that are off lead with sheep as well in the same location, but they are the remote collar group. They're taken from the remote collar group. So I can't even believe that this is a thing. To be honest with you, I cannot believe that I'm sitting here explaining absolute common sense, absolute logic. We have a situation. I'm not going to go off on one because I tend to do that, and I don't want to lose track. I need to do what I'm here to do. But we have this situation, and I have put this before DEFRA's animal welfare team. We have this situation where a hypothetical possibility, harm caused to a dog through the use of electronic training collars intentionally, a hypothetical possibility is being prioritized over a very, very real issue, which is increases year on year on year on dogs attacking other animals, dogs being destroyed that could have healthy dogs being destroyed, which if you look at the research from Vet Compass in Scotland and also down in Australia, similar research reveals exactly similar results as well, which I believe is that 30% of dogs under the age of 3, I believe it's 30%, it may be more than that, so I stand corrected, or I'm open to being stood corrected, are destroyed. Healthy dogs under the age of 3 are destroyed for undesirable behaviours. Now, those undesirable behaviours could quite easily be rectified if the approach to train those dogs were rectified. What the exact approach is, I don't know, but I think I'm probably not alone in saying that the behavior in general of dogs owned by the majority of people leaves a lot to be desired. And it's very easy to point fingers at the people and say, you should have, you should have, I wouldn't have done that, I such and such. Listen, a lot of these people are doing exactly what they're told. They're doing exactly what organizations who they trust and associations who they trust, individuals who they trust, who have, qualifications after their name, have told them to do. But what happens then is that when it all goes wrong, I wash my hands of them. Oh, well, I've gone as far as I can. Just keep doing. Go back to basics. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Increase the value of your reward rather than saying, do you know what? You failed because I failed you. And I failed you because I failed to give you the full picture. What I've actually given you is my version of it, which I prefer to live by because I don't particularly like the idea and I'm not particularly comfortable with, or maybe I'm not competent in effectively correcting a dog and saying to a dog, no, you can't do that. That's a dangerous behavior. You need to do this instead. So, there is a problem, a growing problem with dog training and the push for any form of anti-aversive training. And, this panacea of positive reinforcement has been, I'm going to call it, it's a cancer. It's a cancer, and I've had it, so I don't care. Or have it, so I don't care about offending anybody. So it is. And it's cancerous to relationships. It's cancerous to the safety of animals and to the welfare of animals. So it's been around for 25, 30 years now. You're not seeing an increase in controlled dogs, are you? You're not seeing a reduction in poor behavior. You're not seeing a reduction in unnecessary destructions of animals. So you've got to sit back and question yourself and say, where are we going? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just play you this video clip here, if it will play. Okay, so you can see this dog here that the trainer is just about to bring in. Right, I'm just going to pause that in a minute. Let me see. There we go. I'm going to show you it again in a second anyway. So here it is. And the trainer's working with the dog here. And nothing wrong with the trainer. The trainer's working in the way that the trainer works. That's absolutely fine. There. Did you see that? Let me just bring that back again. Watch where the dog's mouth goes. There. The dog's missed the toy, right? The dog's missed the toy and the dog's actually hit the hand of the trainer instead. You see that? And it's back in, and the trainer's trying to stop the dog from going in. And you can also see as well, look how many ropes is on that dog, or on that dog. What have we got? I think we've got a double clip lead, a head halter lead. We've got a lead to the thing, and the trainer's now holding the collar. Look, there's a collar grab to get the dog to try and release. And the dog's also wearing a head harness. Right, let me just clip on one from there. So the dog's also wearing a head harness, excuse me. We just go on. Okay, there's the same dog. Now, what isn't mentioned, anybody who knows anything about dog training will know, or owning a dog will know, that a head harness, can you see the loop across the muzzle of the dog there in the front? So the head harness there is designed to inhibit the dog from moving forward by applying discomfort that is alleviated or removed when the dog doesn't pull forward. The vast majority, lots of dogs work very successfully in head harnesses. They teach them to walk nicely while they're wearing it. Other dogs will fight and resist it. They find it uncomfortable. It's an aversive piece of equipment. The collar grab that came in there as well. When we're talking about reward-based training, this is what I want to say earlier on, and I mentioned about, what is reward-based training. So there we're grabbing hold of the dog to hold it back. The dog's wearing an aversive piece of equipment anyway, which doesn't feature anywhere in the write-up of AW14028. Nowhere does it say that the reward group were wearing, or some of the dogs in the reward group were wearing aversive equipment, which is essentially the head harness there. And let me just show you. So that there, and I said the dog jumped in. Yes, okay, so it only mouthed contact with the arm of the trainer there, but the trainer's working with reward and bringing the dog up to a state of arousal that causes the dog to contact the trainer's body with teeth. And yet it's the electronic training collar that we're saying causes aggression or increases the probability of aggression in dogs. This is just, you know, something that's really, really worth looking at here. And I want you to see it. Let's have a look at this one here. Reward train group. Here's the dog. Watch. Here's the electronic collar going on the dummy. Look at the dog in the harness. Watch. What would you, how would you classify that? How would you classify that behavior from the dog's point of view? You see that? That doesn't feature in the write-up, Lincoln. You've excluded from the write-up that you've got a dog fighting to resist the application of the head harness or the pressure put on the head harness. Why have you excluded that? Why haven't we said that the reward group were also using aversive equipment to which the dogs clearly displayed avoidance behaviors? You know, I don't understand. I don't understand why this hasn't been noted before. Equally, anybody who's about to start training a dog with an electronic training collar isn't going to apply the electronic training collar whilst the dog is thrashing about in a head harness at the moment that the training is about to start. It doesn't reflect reality. The dog would have been wearing the electronic training collar well before we're about to start the actual training with it. So why is this done? Why are procedures taking place that aren't or that are completely incompatible with the actual training procedures in reality? I'm just going to clip on again. I don't want the YouTube ones now. There we go. Okay, so we're back to Scotland. Look, folks, back to the 3 sheep again that's sleeping in the bottom in the pen, in the tiny pen, where they're not actually able to run. But again, we see one of the e-collar group dogs, and the e-collar group dog is sat off lead at distance from the handler in close proximity to those sheep. I'm just going to pause a second and see if there's any questions that have come up on this. So, oh, bless him, he'd run out of the room and he's just come belting back in when he heard me say that. Sorry.
Sam Jane asked, how can we get evidence showing that e-collars enhance welfare on a national scale?
There's tons of it. There's tons of evidence, Sam, to show that e-collars enhance. There's nigh on 1,450, probably close on 1,500 people on the Association of Responsible Dog Owners who have first-hand experience of training their dogs or having their dogs trained with electronic training collars as a result of failures prior to that, a great many of which have already tried reward-based training. Excuse me for saying reward-based training. I'm going to say training that excludes corrective equipment or any form of corrective intervention. They've already tried that and it's failed them. Yet there they are putting up their stories of how the inclusion of that tool has freed their dog, protected other animals, allowed them to comply with law, you know, allowed them to meet society's expectations and legal demands. The evidence is already there. We already know, you know, you and I know, Sam, as well, that there is a ton of video evidence to be, as well as people saying, come and look at my dogs. Jesus, we took the, excuse me for the people who may be religious for the fact that I was just a bit blasphemous there. It's a small J. We took the dogs to the doors of DEFRA. People took dogs to the doors of DEFRA and said, come outside and have a look. How much evidence do you need to have the actual dogs there outside your own front door? And they didn't bother.
Sam said, I meant, how do we get it seen nationally?
Sam, the only way that you can do things is basically is sharing it. You know, the more you share, the more people will see, the more people listen. You can't deny, look at this. You can't deny what you're looking at. Do you know what I mean? It's like anybody, what I tell you, what I write, you know, my standing as a person of, you know, in high esteem, in whatever, politically, academically, you know, whatever, professionally, whatever it happens to be. What I can see is undeniable. You know, and what I'm seeing here, what I'm showing you here, the differences between these dogs, you know, these dogs here, the e-collar group up in, look at the conditions, look at the sheep and the penning of the sheep, and then you've got the dogs with the sheep that are off lead and free. I'm just going to clip on a second here. Look at this. We're back again. We're in Scotland again. GSD there. GSD, you can see the trailing line coming along just behind the tail. And again, looping around to the right-hand corner of that picture. Off lead, in a down, staring back at the trainer. giving attention to the trainer, not towards the livestock. You know, that is a very, very nice example of what you should be looking at. It's not about how quickly did the dog go into the sit, or how quickly did the dog go into the, does the dog hold it? Is the dog giving focus on the handler? Is the dog giving focus on the handler because the dog's choosing to give focus on the handler rather than the fact that I'm luring that? Is your focus on me, or is your focus on the thing that I've got in my hands, the food that I'm trying to, you know, entice you to look at me for? Here you've got a dog that is in that's a lovely, lovely shot. You know, that's a lovely shot. The sheep are over there looking towards, and the dog is holding that position despite the temperature. Again, it's the electronic collar group that are achieving this. Back to the electronic collar group. This poor bugger's got a coat on. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. And anybody who knows sight hounds will know that they'll shiver, you know, and again, look at this. Look at the proximity to the sheep. Again, I draw back to what I was saying earlier on. The sheep aren't reflective of what it, or representative of what actually would trigger that hound to go after them. However, see the tail, I could look at that, right? I'm going to look at that and say the ears are back, you know, the eyes are wide, the tail is tucked. I'm ticking things that would say to you negative welfare. What I'm not saying is it's freezing bloody cold and it's a short-coated dog, even though it's got a fleece on it. It's a short-coat breed and it's very, very cold. And it's very, very close to animals that it has been referred to for having a chase problem towards. Nobody's holding the end of its lead. The trainer's stepped away from it and it's maintaining that position. Whose welfare are we looking at here? Is it purely the dog, or are we considering the sheep as well? Are the sheep devoid of any sort of like consideration when it comes to animal welfare? Like I said earlier on, does our definition of welfare stop at the end of our lead? We have to consider the other animals. We have to consider the context. And here the context is that the dog is holding a position very nicely in close proximity to an animal that it represents a very real threat towards, but the attention is directed towards the trainer. Again, here we go. E-collar trainer back in alongside the sheep. You can see here that the sheep are actually moving a little. That would be something that would switch a dog on. It's nice that the dog's looking in the opposite way there. And again, we have another e-collar trainer here back in the yard. So we've moved from the field into the yard because the weather was so terrible that the training had to be reset or set up again in the yard to try and replicate where it was. So we had two different training environments. And this one, as you can see, if I go backwards, see the amount of sheep there, and the pen is bigger. And obviously the dog is on the grass. But here we've got a smaller pen and we're surrounded by snow. But again, the lead is dropped. The dog is heeling alongside the trainer and in close proximity to the sheep. Very nice. Coming forward again, we've now got two trainers with, again, this is the e-collar group. And you can see nice loose ewe in the line, in the lead there of this one. And the dog that's behind the trainer over at the other side there. Let me just tell you something else. Hang on a second before I do that. Joe, is there any, sorry, have you gone out? Oh, can you just tell me, is there any question at the moment? There's a point that I want to make, and it's an important point that I want to make.
Yeah, there's a few. I'll just get to Danny's. Danny said, never mentioned anything about how stressed the reward trained dogs were. Bet they're not this. Cortisol.
Yeah, they're cortisol, yeah.
Levels weren't tested after that active stressing incident.
Correct. And like you say, it's an active stressing incident, isn't it, Danny? You know, because an aversive tool is being used in order to try and restrain the dog. And, you know, we talk about time and patience and counter conditioning, systematic desensitization, etc. Where's the systematic desensitization taking place for that hound that's in the head harness there, that's thrashing about in it? It looks at all where the collar's grabbed, etc. It looks like it's a case of just get on with it, son. A point that I wanted to raise, and I've looked at, I've taken some stills on some of these, and I've looked at a lot of these videos. In fact, I've looked at all of these videos. And what I really, and it's something that was brought out in the original conclusion of the study, or for the study, prior to the actual study being published. I've seen it. I've seen the trainers training the dogs with the electronic collars and the trainers training the dogs with reward. What I can tell you for absolute certainty is that where there is negative behaviours or behaviours associated with negative welfare states, albeit transient, or otherwise. But where there is that, a lot of them are down to the individual nature of the dog. So you can see anybody with an eye for a dog can look at a dog and think, you know, that dog by its very nature is going to throw behaviors that will make you think, oh my goodness, something terrible has happened to it, where really you've looked at it. You know, the other thing is that there are trainer differences, not the use of the electronic training collar, because you can see when the electronic training collar is being pushed, there are trainer differences in the way that the actual trainers interact and handle the animals. Well, if I'm going to be more firm, more abrupt with a dog than somebody else who isn't, then the dog is going to give me a different behavioral response as a result of that. And that happens a lot in this study. That happened a lot in this study. There is a lot that can be put down to the individual training style of particular trainers, as opposed to the electronic training collar. The electronic training collar was barely actually being used, but the behaviors of dogs were indicative of uncertainty or confusion or reluctance on occasion. And it wasn't because of the electronic training collar. It was because of the style of the handlers. And that was mentioned, that was brought up originally, was the fact that this could be down to trainer-related factors. And believe you me, it is massively down to trainer-related factors, as opposed to the actual application of the electronic collar. That is a real problem, because it hasn't been adequately brought out. It hasn't been adequately investigated, you know, whether the same dog that's being trained with a different trainer would yield different results, etc., you know, or as well as different styles. So it isn't just, you can't simply, and different weather conditions, obviously, you can't simply say, because the dog is wearing a live electronic collar and the trainer has a transmitter, the behavior of that dog, as I see it, is as a result of that. Correlation doesn't equal causation, does it? So there was lots of things to be considered that weren't adequately considered, certainly in decision making. I second Geoffrey Cox in forwarding the letter that's saying this was insufficient evidence to support a ban. Absolutely, it's insufficient evidence. It's very, very poor. Moving forwards again, what do we see here? We see one of the male trainers. So we're one of the e-collar trainers, and we see this little dog here. You can see long lines dropped at heel, walking alongside the sheep. Again, moving forward again, and what we get here is same thing. Look above the dog's head, dangling down above the dog's head. Let's say again, I have a bias. I look at that, I see a transmitter. It is clear, other than the fact that it's a bloke and not a woman, then it's pretty clear that this is an e-collar trainer. Look again, that the lead isn't being held. Look at the proximity to the sheep and notice that the sheep aren't being contained within the livestock fencing panels there. Now, let me see if we've got anything else. Okay, one of the reward trained dogs. This is about as close as you see the reward trained dogs. Get that pen there over to the right hand side. That larger pen contains sheep, and look at the interest of the dog towards the sheep in comparison to these. Pretty obvious, isn't it? Look at the taut line, look at the dog moving forward, because the fact is that I'm leaning towards is an appetitive stimulus. It's something that I actually want to get towards, and I haven't experienced anything whatsoever to say to me anything other than that. The trainer brings out rewards, brings out foods to get the attention of the dog back on themselves. Here, you can see the food coming from the pocket as it's being delivered to the dog. But what you've got to consider as well, in nothing against the training here, you know, nothing against the trainer using rewards to get the attention of the dog like that. But look at these, what was looked at when you look at China et al.'s study, which was comprehensively basically dissected and destroyed by psychology professor Doug Elif, along with Sargison and McLean, whose paper was published both from New Zealand universities. Professor Elif being the deputy dean at that time of Auckland University, which was one of the top, still is one of the top universities in the world, who basically, the China et al. Paper that was based on this study, the same videos of this study, and basically took it apart. And I'll tell you some of the things that Professor Elif said about this. Are there any questions at the moment, Joe?
Ali or Alison said, you mentioned cortisol levels were measured during the study. Did the study state how those levels were measured? As far as I'm aware, it can only be done with blood samples.
No, you can have salivary cortisol. Salivary cortisol measures were taken. I think, but I stand to be corrected, but I think blood cortisol is more accurate, but salivary cortisol is obviously less intrusive. And I would guess that the actual process itself of extracting the sample for analysis is less invasive, etc. So salivary cortisol can be taken as well. What was the other part of that? That's okay. There were other at the outset. There were intended to be other measures of behaviour as well to be undertaken that weren't. One of those was heart rate, attaching heart rate monitors. I believe that I think for problems of whether they were slipping off or whatever, that was abandoned. There were several alternative or additional measures that were supposed to have taken place that didn't, that were abandoned for one reason or another. And so we essentially came down to cortisol and observing the video recordings and the behaviors of the dog and behaviors that are indicative of negative welfare states, and then also the dog's if you like, the dog's ability thereafter to make choices, and whether or not the dog is an optimist or a pessimist based on your position of food bowls and the dog's ability to, or willingness to advance towards certain food bowls that contained food or otherwise. So that was also a sort of like a post-study additional measure that was taken place to assess the individual dogs. Let me just bring you on to Professor Elif and a paper that he's written, or a commentary that he's written. And this commentary was on the China, Mills and Cooper paper, the efficacy of dog training with and without electronic training collars versus a focus on positive reinforcement. And this was published in 2020 in Frontiers. Oh, you all right?
Cheryl commented, some people can't comment. That some people can't comment.
Oh, I don't know. As in, some people can't comment. As in, some people have no.
No, if it's like some people have no right to talk.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. So, Professor Elif, let me just. I've put this up before, but I just want to give you this, because basically that paper was a master's thesis, if you like, that was written about this study, the study that's got the images here for you, and a revisit to the videos and a look at, whether the efficacy of training with rewards was greater than electronic training collars or vice versa. And what Professor Elif says is that China, Mills and Cooper compared a group of dogs trained using electronic shock collars with two control groups trained without them. The trained target behaviors were recalled to the trainer in the response come and sitting in response to the command sit. Now, as you can see, this would be one of the ones that command sit. Look at the distance from the actual pen that's housing the livestock in comparison to the earlier clips that I showed you of the sit of the electronic training collars, which were trainers, which were essentially slap bang alongside the fencing or very, very close to the livestock themselves. So distance in relation to the prey animal is important. Proximity to the prey animal is important because it obviously determines the level of understanding or the willingness of the dog to provide that behavior in close proximity to something that it considers to be an extremely appetitive competing motivator, something it would rather move towards. In terms of different measures of performance, they reported either no differences between groups or better performance for the control group trained without e-collars and with an explicit emphasis on positive reinforcement. China et al. Interpret these findings as evidence that e-collars should not be used in dog training. However, the reported research suffers from, number one, sufficient external and internal confounding variables to weaken severely any comparison between groups, two, sometimes inappropriate data analysis, and three, a very strange choice of target behaviors to train, perhaps betraying an oversimplified understanding of the principles of behavioral psychology. Number four, incautious conclusions that go well beyond the reported data, okay? Conclusions that go well beyond the reported data, both in terms of the specific applications of the e-collars in the study, but more seriously in generalization to other possible uses of e-collars. Furthermore, the anticipated effect of each of these flaws is consistently in the direction unfavorable to a finding that e-collar use was effective. So every finding is favourable towards saying e-collars aren't effective, e-collars aren't effective, consistently unfavourable. And Professor Elif says, my conclusion is that China et al., at least if interpreted much more cautiously than do its authors, makes a flawed but not entirely valueless contribution to the scientific literature. However, listen to this bit. If you're in a country where your decision makers are using this AW14028, this Lincoln study, as a basis upon which to draw their conclusions, make their decisions about the necessity or the benefit of electronic training collars, just listen to this bit. As evidence to inform evidence-based policy making, it is very seriously flawed and should not be relied on. How much clearer can you get than a deputy dean at one of the world's top universities, a psychology dean, a psychology professor, saying that the evidence is very seriously flawed and should not be relied upon? A move to ban e-collars based on China et al., which in itself is based on this, would not be an evidence-based decision. Just see if you've got any questions on that or comments.
Apparently you've said to James is limited who can comment on this.
I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't, but I don't know why. Okay.
Do you want me to read out a question?
Yeah, if you've got one.
So Sam asked, who chooses the breeds used in the study?
I don't know the answer to that, Sam. I think there was, but you basically had a selection of, I think to a degree that the samples of dogs there was an attempt to evenly match them across. So I'd need to go back and completely look at it, but I think it was, I'd say it was fairly done. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that one group has got breeds that are less likely to chase livestock in comparison to another. If you look at the dog that we've got in front of us on the image here, there's no doubt herding heritage in there. So, and again, the hound that the same trainer, whether it's a Irish wolfhound or deerhound there, that the trainer was, I can't remember, but the trainer was having. So I think I would be cautious in saying that there were problems in, or that one group was given more problematic dogs or dogs that were more prone as a breed to predate towards animals than another, or more problematic than another. I just want to see if I can bear with me. Again, I just want to read from Professor Elif's commentary on China et al. And the reason that, although he's commenting on China et al. And not on AW14028, but I have to make this point. China et al. Is based entirely upon 14028. So China et al.'s paper took these videos, wrote about them, analysed them, wrote about them, and was produced. So it is essentially one and the same. It's just different conclusions based on different criteria that are being looked at. There is well-established literature on the efficacy of e-collars at reducing serious undesirable behaviours by dogs, which I will not rehearse here. The point of the discussion is that China et al. Do not address the main use for e-collar use at all. Their paper simply attempts to show that e-collars do not confer an advantage when used to deliver negative reinforcement for two behaviours that are particularly unsuited to e-collar training. So essentially, the principle, what Professor Elif is saying is that the principle, or one of the principal reasons for the use of electronic training collars, is to stop a behaviour from happening, as opposed to actually cause a behaviour to happen. And in teaching recall, causing recall to happen, or causing sit to happen, the actual use of electronic training collars to stop a behaviour from happening wasn't evaluated. It was in 1402, which was a preliminary study to 1402A, where electronic training collars were used to stop dogs predating towards livestock, chasing, attacking livestock, and it was successful in every one of the dogs tested. But the study ended there, or that preliminary study ended there, and instead 1402A came about. Ask yourself why that is. Why aren't we looking at training reward trained dogs that are off lead, the same as the e-collar group were, or allowed to be off lead, to avoid attacking that animal if reward training is equally as effective? That ties back into, I think it was Bruce earlier on said about the £50,000 challenge, where we talked about, the whether anybody could actually demonstrate, visibly provide evidence that a dog can be trained through the use of positive incentives alone, the lack of any form of aversive intervention, to choose not to attack an animal that it innately wanted to attack, that was intrinsically, it was rewarding in itself. It just triggered a behavior in the dog where the dog actually desires going towards and attacking that animal. So if you train a dog with rewards and you don't use any form of correction whatsoever, and then you place the dog in the company of that animal and you remove yourself, will that dog choose to attack that animal or not? That's what that challenge was about. Nobody took it up, which is fine. But it proves a point, doesn't it? And it simply proves a point in that there are limits. There are limits to preferential training approaches, as opposed to training approaches that are based on necessity and genuine animal welfare beyond my projected idea of welfare on what sits at the end of my lead, apart from all the other animals, or as opposed to all the other animals that it interacts with. Let me just see here. Are there any questions there at all at the moment, Joe?
So is there other evidence that the government is using to justify its stance on the potential ban?
No, this is right. Let me give you something here. This is the sole scientific project, the sole piece of scientific evidence that the government is pinning their proposal to blanket ban handheld electronic training collars on. This is it, folks. What you're looking at here is it. What I've discussed here and talking to you, what we've raised here, this is it. That is considered sufficient evidence. If there are any farmers watching this, or any people who are, involved in conservation, wildlife management, any people who are involved in deer populations, in waterfowl, in ground nesting birds, etc., where people work to ensure that their dogs, whether they were on the lead or off, choose not to represent a threat to your animals, and the government wishes to withdraw that ability, even where people are saying, look, we want to do it in a regulated manner, we want to do it using the best quality equipment that we can under tuition, so that we've been taught what to do, we understand what we're doing, and then we hold our hands up, we balls up, we hurt an animal unnecessarily, we cause unnecessary suffering or harm. We're open. You come and prosecute, no problem at all. But do not prosecute us or infer that we are going to do that act, cause that harm, cause that unnecessary suffering before we've even done it, by virtue of the fact that we're simply including an electronic training collar into our training program in order to protect our animals and yours. This is it. This is what it is all based on. This study. Have a look at that image there, by the way. That's one of the e-collar trainers. What do you think that is in his hand? And what do you think the guy's doing at the moment? You have a bit of bias about you. Would it take too much to put together the fact that the person may well be about to press or pressing the button on the remote collar at that time? How on earth is that blinding me to who is doing what in terms of the use of an electronic training collar? It's as clear as the nose on my face what the person is doing. And when it's in a video format, it's even clearer, because you see the person reach for the transmitter, lift it up, look down at it, and then move digits towards it, as in fingers towards it, to be able to operate it. So is this what the government is pinning their proposal on? Not just this government, but other governments as well throughout the world are very heavily influenced by this work. So here's a letter that was received from Department for the Environment of Food and Rural Affairs very, very recently, with questions that were asked. So your constituents' first two questions request any research DEFRA holds to the differing ability for e-collars and positive reward-based training. This is DEFRA's quote, positive reward-based training. They don't actually explain what that is, and I don't know what that is, and I don't know anybody who's actually can give me a definition of what is positive reward-based training. And I just want to put aside, I've said it before, but positive and negative, when talked about in dog training sense and behavior change sense, you're talking about addition and removal. You're not talking about good and bad or better or worse. You're just talking about an addition or removal. So if we're going to say positive reward-based training, then we must be talking about the addition of rewards. But then all training is reward-based training. Everything carries a reward when you're working with a dog and it does the correct thing. You know, whether that's verbal praise, tactile praise, you know, some form of social interaction, whether it's food, toys, whether it's the ability to run free, whatever it is, everything. You can't train a dog if it isn't reward-based training. So the actual term itself is very, very misleading and misunderstood, and it fails to be adequately explained by the department. So DEFRA, your constituents' first two questions request any research DEFRA holds relating to the differing ability for e-collars and positive reward-based training to prevent incidents of livestock worrying or the pursuit of wild animals. Okay, DEFRA, what have you got that shows the difference between the inclusion of electronic training collars and the rejection of any form of corrective training to address dogs attacking or chasing livestock or other wild animals? This is not an area into which DEFRA has commissioned research. However, many trainers and behaviourists offer reward-based training as a method of successfully training dogs. Let that sink in. Can you tell me, please, DEFRA, you're about to remove this tool that is scientifically validated again and again in different studies by different researchers from different universities under different conditions to effectively address predation in dogs towards livestock or wild animals. Can you tell me, please, now that you're planning to withdraw this ability for owners to proactively prevent their dog from doing that, what research do you have? What research are you basing that decision on? This is not an area into which DEFRA has commissioned research. So what have you got? Many trainers and behaviourists offer reward-based training as a method of successfully training dogs. So what? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And what's great, but that isn't the question that was asked. How many trainers and behaviourists offer reward-based training as a method of successfully preventing dogs from choosing to chase after livestock or wild animals when the opportunity presents itself? None. You have no research. This paper here, this study here, when it was cited by China et al., basically was hailed as the, even for its most commonly cited reasons, such as chasing livestock, electronic training collars are no better than reward-based training. Yet DEFRA are turning around and saying we haven't commissioned any research to look at livestock worrying or wildlife, chasing wildlife. The statutory code of practice for the welfare of dogs has more information to educate and remind owners of their responsibilities. So the statutory code is your responsibility to provide for the welfare needs of their animals, but also keep their dogs safe and under control. This applies to handling dogs in the vicinity of livestock. So just have a look at this. We haven't got any research that says that what we're telling you to do actually works. We admit we haven't got any. We've got research, AW 1402 minus the A. Our preliminary study showed us, and it was reported back from Lincoln University, that all dogs that underwent the training with the electronic training collar lost their interest in chasing sheep, okay, because it was sheep that we were using at the time. Also, our ethics board only allowed dogs to be off lead in the proximity of sheep if they were wearing some form of collar which was capable of delivering electronic stimulation so that you could stop them. So we know that the electronic collar works. We know that we could only let dogs off lead amongst livestock if they were wearing a live electronic training collar. We haven't commissioned any research to show that positive reward-based training is effective as a method of successfully stopping dogs from chasing after livestock and wildlife. But we have an abundance of research to show that electronic training collars do, aside of our own. We have an abundance of that, but we're going to pull the plug on it anyway. But we get 15 to 30,000, I'd say minimum, livestock attacks alone. Livestock attacks. I'm not talking about dogs attacking deer, dogs attacking other dogs, dogs attacking cats, dogs running, chasing after vehicles. Just that alone. We have this massive problem. We have this proven, this scientifically validated means of being able to address that. And we're going to pull the plug on it despite the fact that we've got no research to support the efficacy of positive reward-based training instead. And plus, it's your legal responsibility to ensure for the welfare of your animal and keep your dog under control. And it applies to it when it's in the vicinity of livestock. Another question that was asked, your constituent further requests we provide any evidence we may have comparing the harm caused to dogs by e-collars with the harm caused to livestock which results from attacks. Valid question, very, very valid question. If this is an animal welfare based decision, and this truly is animal welfare policy making, in comparison to the number of attacks and the harm and suffering caused to sheep or other animals by uncontrolled, unresponsive dogs, what evidence do you have for the harm caused to dogs as a result of the inclusion, responsible or otherwise, but let's say responsible inclusion of electronic training collars used in a responsible, humane and proportionate manner? Again, this is not an area where DEFRA has commissioned research. However, concerns that e-collars can cause long-term harm has been made by a number of trainers, behaviourists, the animal welfare sector, and dog keeping organisations. We've got no evidence, but a few people have said concern about it. A few people have raised concern about it. We have no evidence. This isn't evidence. What you've got in front of you, it's insufficient evidence. They're essentially saying the same thing. However, we get the same department referring to this as robust evidence. On one hand, they're saying it's robust, and on the other hand, they're saying we haven't actually got any. We didn't commission any research to look at dogs attacking other animals. Well, which one is it? The left hand doesn't seem to know which the right hand's doing, and the consequences of which are the potential unnecessary destruction of goodness knows how many perfectly healthy animals that needn't be destroyed, that can be helped, that can be protected. Because of what? On the basis of what? No commissioned research, no evidence. Some trainers and behaviourists say offering reward-based training as a method of successfully training dogs. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt for a second that people successfully train some dogs with reward-based training. I train dogs with reward-based training successfully. Everybody I know trains dogs successfully with reward-based training. But what you've got to ask yourself is, what is the context? What is it that you're training the dog to do or not do? What is the alternative behavior that you're looking for instead, and why? What is the impact of that dog on society, on other people's animals, on other lives, other innocent lives that is equally deserving as animal welfare consideration as the one that's at the end of our lead? You got anything on there, Joe?
Recently, Dan Clark said we're going to need to be prepared to march for this, get a day off and flocked to Downing Street. This isn't just about e-collars, it's about justice. 100%, 110%. It's about justice. And it's about the right to protect your own animal, the right to do what's right for your own animal, not have somebody else dictate it for you. I don't know a single person that if they saw somebody causing intentional or unnecessary harm or suffering to an animal, wouldn't give them a crack round the back of the head, as well as report them, and ensuring that the person doesn't have access to animals again. So this isn't about just about tools. It is about the right to protect and do what's right for the animals that we have control over. I've just popped a screen up there. Have a look at the person to the left-hand side and what's hanging around the front of them. I think you'll find that that's a treat pouch. And that's pretty much all that you see on that person with the lead. So I would say that it's pretty obvious that that was the reward trained group. And let's just see what else we've got on here, if we've got any others on here. There's another one in the snow again on the side. I might put that one on at the beginning. And again, trainers with e-collars and no activation units, pretty obvious there, isn't it? So on the right-hand side, we've got an e-collar trainer training a dog without an e-collar. And then in the middle, we have a reward-based trainer. And on the left-hand side, we also have a reward-based trainer. Fairly obvious, as I say. I think that's the last one that I've got there. So I'm going to click. There's lots more, but I'm going to click the screen share, stop the screen sharing. There we go. Now I'm going to take a few questions on that. And then I just basically want to, before I do that, let me just ask, can I ask something? You've seen me put on all this evidence aside, or this the weakness of this evidence and the failure to actually
disclose information that seriously undermines the credibility of this research. The fact that the blinding protocols were breached, the fact that the training locations were various things, training locations was different. There wasn't mixed sex trainers. Dogs that were trained with one style weren't then subsequently trained with another style to see if it's the actual style of training or the style of the trainer, or whether it's the individual nature of the dog. They're not automata, are they? They are individuals. They have individual characters and individual desires. So various things weren't done in order to, really see how robust this is. And, the evidence aside, there's the other aspect to this, and you've seen me put on Facebook a few times asking for people who may suffer from any physical disability. I don't like to use the word disability, but any sort of like physical impairment, whether that's something of birth or something as a result of accident, injury, or illness, who choose or have found themselves in the position where they have ended up or sought a means of controlling their dog and providing for their dog and protecting other animals and their dog, adhering to law, abiding by legal obligations and social expectations, and have used electronic training collars for that. And I've asked those people to come forward. And the reason that I've asked those people to come forward is that this proposal, not just in England, in Wales, where it has already happened, in Scotland, where it's on hold and guidance has been issued instead, in various jurisdictions around the world. What this proposal fails to do is to consider owners as individuals with individual circumstances, individual needs and requirements. It assumes when you have deference, stop, keep a dog on a lead, or the people keep a dog on a lead around livestock, NFU, National Sheep Association, keep a dog on a lead around livestock. Thank you, National Sheep Association, for having the courage to also say at the bottom of your livestock worrying advice that you endorse the responsible use or the regulated use of electronic training collars where it's done so humanely and professionally in order to reduce livestock attacks by dogs upon your animals. Thank you for that, for having the courage to stand out and say that. But where we have this keep a dog on a lead, it implies that everybody has the physical capacity to do that. Every dog owner has the physical capacity to do that. That no dog owner lives in a rural location where they have some form of physical impairment, but they still want to keep their animals safe. So they've turned to an electronic training collar and included that into their training in order to provide for their animal, in order to meet their legal and social expectations, because a lead for them isn't safe enough. So it's just like I put my seatbelt on, I also want a vehicle with an airbag. I want more than just the one. I want more. I want to be really sure that should the worst happen, either my dog won't make a decision to do a particular thing that's going to result in catastrophic consequences, or I am in a position to be able to immediately control the behavior of my dog, even despite that direct physical restraint between the two of us. This is being taken from people like, it's a discriminatory proposal, taking away something that people are relying upon or have chosen as a result of their physical capabilities and replacing it with nothing for them. Nothing. There is no alternative being presented for people who use electronic training collars because they cannot physically rely upon a lead. Believe you me, if you've ever held a dog, I've worked with a doctor who has a spiral fracture from a wrist to her elbow from a cockapoo that hit the end of a flexi lead running in the wrong direction. There are plenty of people who have had accidents and resulted in injuries as a result of a dog, even a small dog, that is determined, that is presented with the opportunity, hitting the end of that lead at speed. They generate power. And a lot of people haven't got the physical capacity to be able to deal with that, recognize that, so put measures in place so that they can prevent that from happening or being a problem. Should it happen, they're able to control it. This is being removed from people like that with no alternative being put in place. How on earth in 2022 can we take people that have got physical impairments and basically say, never mind, never mind? It's like a David Brent sketch. Do you know what I mean? From The Office. It's like, what are we doing here? We're taking away something that people are relying upon and replacing it with nothing. This is absolutely ludicrous. And that is why I've been asking for people who have those, that sort of like impairment, that restricted ability or mobility to be able to control their dog, to actually contact, because it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. Even taking all your evidence, which is also wrong, but taking all your evidence aside, it's wrong. And anyway, I'm off on one there. I hope that makes sense. I hope you can see what I'm saying. And please don't excuse, a sort of like heightened state within myself as being anything more than passion, or anger derived from passion. It's wrong. Is there anything there, Joe?
Damien asked earlier, how can more people get on board to back the movement?
Drop a message. Either send an email to info at joinardo, joinardo.com, info@joinardo.com, or direct message me if you want it to go to me. But there's several of us that are involved with Joinardo. So info@joinardo.com. We need to basically speak out. This isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. Whoever you are, you must be able to see this. If there was science, let me tell you something. If there was science that basically showed, even to a pretty large degree, showed that for controlling off-lead dogs under the distraction of competing motivation, so think dogs that would like to chase, dogs that refuse to come back, dogs that represent a threat to other animals and themselves, if there were comprehensive evidence to say, no, mate, look, these are bad. Look what they've done to this dog. Look what I'd be the first in line to say, do you know what, this is wrong. I would be the first in line. I was an Association of Pet Dog Trainers trainer. I was a positive reinforcement, I'm not even based, but I was anti-aversive. I was non-corrective. I was entirely on board with the whole, let's get rid of this. It's wrong. I was wrong. It's wrong because people and animals require this. And the evidence to say otherwise simply doesn't exist. The evidence, a lot of the evidence that is cited when you look at it, it isn't presented in military dogs being, trained by 3 different methods, police dogs being trained by, animals in settings that aren't reflective of society. And this AW14002A that we've put through here, which was an attempt at a sort of like field study, if you like, to be able to get more of a lifelike insight into the use of the tools. As I say, from the things that I've said earlier on, it's failed. It failed terribly. I wish that several trainers who I know and I had were in a position to be able to influence how that study actually should have been conducted and could have been conducted with Lincoln. But hey ho, what came out wasn't very good. If you're a vet, and I know this is difficult for vets, or if you're somebody who works in the veterinary profession, because you may have your opinion, like a lot of the other organizations and associations, you may have your opinion, but you may consider it to be slightly detrimental to your profession to actually speak up and say, do you know what, there is a place for this. There is a place for this. And if you look at this, look at the science. If you want the science, I'll send you the science, as in the complete science, for the reasons that I've just stated, the inclusion of remote collars for the reasons that I've just stated. And I'd ask yourself, as a once upon a time, I would have liked to have been a vet. I actually got through to a final interviews, believe it or not, for an inspector in the RSPCA as well, way back when I was first into the policing, but I went into policing instead. And I ask you, as somebody whose genuine goal, your direction is promoting animal welfare, protecting animals, preserving freedoms, providing the best for animals, I ask you to have the courage to sort of like think, well, somebody may not like what I say, but to actually contact, and speak out. I've worked with lots and lots of veterinary professionals in one way or another, but to actually speak out and say, I can see that I don't see how anybody who genuinely has an interest in protecting and preserving freedom, safety, the well-being of animals, can be in a position where you're either putting a needle into what you know to be a perfectly healthy dog and extinguishing the life within that animal unnecessarily, when you know when you know that there is an alternative, or going out to the scene of an attack from a dog and being in the awful position of having to take the life of those animals that are suffering terribly as a result of that dog, when you know that that could be prevented and that it could be done responsibly. You know, people can be taught very easily how to responsibly use electronic training collars, humanely use them, and use them proportionately in a justified way. I would just ask you to just look within yourself, you know, and just say, I came back from, as I say, from a very extremist opposition perspective, because ultimately, regardless of what somebody would rather I said, or what you know, my concerns about how the public perceive me, I've got to live with myself. And if I know that there's a way and I'm choosing not to do that way for politics or bent science, then I would really, really question why I'm in the profession that I'm in. And that's any profession where I'm going to refuse that. Animal rescue, you know, people who are in centres, people who are in positions of influence within centres, people who I know who are in high positions of influence within centres, who refuse to actually have the integrity to say what you truly know is true, and you do. You know, I would just ask you to just say, you know, there's got to be a line drawn under this, because it's going the wrong way, and it's going the wrong way for the wrong reasons. I'm just going to see if there's anything else, and then I'm probably going to let people go, because we're stonking on there. Is that 9 o'clock? Sorry, I didn't realise it was that time.
Do you want this just the last one? Or?
Yes. Yeah, unless if there's a couple, I'll take a couple of people have taken the time to ask.
So Michelle Wright said, James, what about you set up something similar to these sturdy stuff mentioned and record all from start to finish, the nitty gritty, etc. I know it'll cost a bit, but maybe the money donated could be used.
We already, what I would say is that visible evidence is there. There already is visible evidence. And you can, when you're faced with somebody who is so resistant because because of the cognitive dissonance that causes, you know, where I don't want to see that which I've been saying is untrue. I want to see the things that I have been saying. I don't want to. I can't have two realities. So I'll stick with the one that I've been saying. Thank you very much indeed. It's no matter how much you present to somebody like that, if I'm going to put my back against, turn my back on it and walk away from it, that's what I'm going to do. The only thing that people can do, and I'm saying this is as genuine as I can say it, to people who may think I'm an arsehole, to people, you know, hate me, whatever. The only thing that I can honestly say is ask yourself why you are actually thinking what you're thinking. Why do you hold the belief that you hold? And is it honestly across the board that your belief is right, that it can never be challenged, that you can never actually be wrong, that there can never be circumstances where what you dislike can actually be beneficial for other animals? And if you are an animal lover, if you genuinely are an animal lover, you would have no hesitation whatsoever in doing that. And when you're presented with the evidence, the visible evidence that already exists, the scientific corroborative evidence for the inclusion, you know, of electronic training collars, as per Professor Douglas Elliff, you know, as per Sargison and McLean, when they put their published work out in, it's on the Lincoln research page on the joinardo.com website, have said as well, there is a place. And when you've got an entire community that is saying, we'll accept regulation, we'll accept responsible use, we'll accept quality equipment, what is the problem? What is the problem? All done? Okay, folks, look, I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you. If anybody stayed with me for the full 2 hours, well done. You know, thank you for doing that. I really, really hope that you've seen stuff here that you consider to be valuable. I hope that there are people who may just sit there and question themselves and think, do you know what? Just maybe. All you need is just a glimmer of just maybe. Maybe maybe we're wrong. As an organization, maybe we're wrong. As an association, you know, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we ought to really revisit this and have a look at it in a more open-minded manner, to see how we can genuinely reach the needs of the most, you know, as many animals as we possibly can. And what do we gain by going down the route that we're going down, and what do they gain if we go down that route. So anyway, there you go. Thank you very much indeed for spending your evening with me. I'm going to have another cup of tea. Thanks, Joe, for helping. And please, if there's any questions, continue to pop them on there, and I'll have a look and try and answer them. All right. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Thank you now. Bye-bye.